Hello and welcome to episode 165 of Magic Rays of Light, a podcast exploring the world of Apple TV and so much more. I'm your host, Sigmund Judge, and I'm joined by Devon Dundee as always. And, well, we're recording a little bit earlier this week, so we'll see how that goes. But, you know, it's a busy week for us both for different reasons. But it is Easter week, and so lots of news I think is been pushed forward and out of the way. That said, I won't be hunting Easter eggs this week. I think you will be.
Oh yeah, we've got lots of egg hunts planned. We've got at least 2 or 3 on the calendar already.
But what I have been hunting is a little bit of follow-up. We talked a lot about black magic, immersive video, and the post-production workflow. There were a couple things that I misspoke on that I just wanted to correct. One of the biggest things is, of course, after obtaining that camera, you're probably going to need to upgrade your hardware as well in terms of Mac computing hardware. What I've been told since the recording from Blackmagic is that in testing, they were using the 76-core GPU M2 Ultra to be able to play back the files in their native resolution. Now, the fun thing is, you can, of course, downscale the resolution that's being played back to be able to work with those files in DaVinci. And so, it's still a little bit up in the air what you will need to be able to work with an immersive video workflow, and we'll get official word at some point down the line very soon, probably in the next couple of months. But I just wanted to put it out there. Kind of also misspoke on the fact that, you know, an iPad was being used with immersive video, and, you know, these M4 chips in the iPad Pros are probably going to do the job. Actually, what was happening was the iPad that was on the show floor at NAB last week was connected to their editing accessory for iPad, and actually everything wasn't working natively, but the iPad was being used as a third display connected to a Mac. So, just wanted to get that out of the way. There are a lot of exciting things coming to Apple Vision Pro and Vision OS in the future. But just for a moment, you talked about Vision OS just this past week and what's happening now with it, with a good friend of the show.
Yeah, Tim Chatton was kind enough to have me back on Vision Pros to talk about what's happening with my Vision Pro setup, and also to talk about Vision OS 2.4, which is actually a really big update. We touched on it a little bit here, but of course this is an Apple TV podcast, so if you want all the details and the deep dive on all the new things happening in Vision OS and Vision OS 2.4, you can check out that episode of Vision Pros. It's a great show, and I'm not just saying that because Tim had me on, but I do appreciate that as well.
Only the shows where you're a guest, right? Only kidding, Tim. We also had heard a lot of reports this past week with regard to dramatic changes across Apple's platforms. At least that's what's expected and rumoured, you know. We've heard this week iPad is reportedly becoming more Mac-like. iOS is reportedly becoming more Vision OS-like. I'm personally excited to see what happens with WatchOS at WWDC in June. But we're already putting together in the background our expectations for tvOS this year, and the code name this year is Charisma, which has me very, very excited because I want a charismatic OS. Of course, we have lots and lots of ideas already, but we'd love to hear from our dear listeners what ideas you have for tvOS 19 or whatever it may be called. And I don't know, a potentially dramatic and long overdue overhaul is what I'm expecting. So shoot your ideas over to us by emailing magic@macstories.net or contacting us via socials. We'll share them amongst our own ideas in a future episode coming very, very soon.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that WWDC is so close, but of course with that comes all the rumors and the wish casting, and we got to get our list together to contribute to that, and we want to hear what our listeners are thinking as well.
Yeah, let's talk about everything coming up on this week's show, though. We're going to talk about cancellations in streaming and how we'd like to see them handled in the future in light of the recent non-renewal of Mythic Quest. And we're going to recap the second season of Surface. But we begin with a highlight of this week's Apple Original Series premiere, Government Cheese.
The Chambers are a quirky family pursuing lofty and seemingly impossible dreams, beautifully unfettered by the realities of the world in 1969 San Fernando Valley. When Hampton Chambers is released from prison, his long-awaited family reunion doesn't go quite as he'd planned. During his absence, his wife and sons have formed an unconventional family unit, and Hampton's return spins their world into chaos.
I'm not doing smash and grabs anymore. I'm on the righteous path.
A what?
This invention is my family's future.
I think you have a date.
Are you in trouble?
No. Dreamers are dangerous. Then consider me dangerous.
The series comes to us from Apple Studios and Macro Television Studios, written, executive produced, and co-showrun by Paul Hunter and Aisha Carr, based on Hunter's short film of the same name. It stars David Oyelowo, Simone Missick, Jahi Dallo Winston, Evan Ellison, and others, including John Ortiz and Adam Beach. Sigmund, we both had the opportunity to see at least the premiere episode ahead of time, so tell me, what's the basis of this story?
Well, Government Cheese follows Hampton Chambers, played by David Oyelowo, as he is released from prison and he goes back to the family he left behind. He's been away for 3 years, with his initial sentence being for check fraud, followed by an additional year added for bad behaviour. And whilst Hampton, now a free man, has been enlightened by found faith within prison, along with his big plans that he's conjured up inside and a new invention, he finds it complicated, of course, to rejoin the life he once knew. His wife Astoria, she's moved onwards in his absence, as has in part his sons Einstein and Harrison, who of course have grown in his absence, and they're actually probably a little easier and a little more excited to have him back. But despite Hampton Chambers' indiscretions, he seems to believe he can come back as if nothing has happened, which is a really, really interesting element to this storytelling. What's kind of giving him the confidence in himself is his faith and his ability to make everything okay. And that faith in himself really comes with the invention of a self-sharpening drill called the Bit Machine. And his lead at this big company called Rocket Corp promises him a meeting which in his eyes is going to lead to a 6-figure deal, but things don't go completely to plan.
Right. During Hampton's final days before his release, chaos breaks out following the flooding of the prison's water system, which incites a riot, and with Hampton's Bit Machine plans hidden within his Bible, he's protecting himself and his future with a screwdriver in hand, ultimately turning it on the person that led him to faith within the prison in what I have to say is a really intense way to kick off this series, but I think is a really important inciting incident in Hampton's life and his return home.
Yeah, right. And when Hampton's out, he's dressed up and ready to visit Rocket Corp. And as he's cycling along, he gets disturbed. He's picked up by his friend Bootsy, who is with him for every misdeed, it would seem, along the way before we join him. He used to run smash and grabs with him, and he's also part of the reason he was released from prison. Because, well, whether it was meant or not, this murder of actually the person that introduces him to faith in prison is covered up, and we find out the reason why he got away with it, because he's driven by Bootsy to meet a French cartel who want their $2,000 after two brothers are said to have taken the fall for his accidental murder during the riots, itself instigated by one of their own, which I think is really interesting. So in the end, you've got a really quirky show that's mixing faith, a comeback story, alongside crime and extortion, that has you really willing on the show's lead as he's met with temptation back out of, his words, the righteous path that he's trying to stay on. And it all sounds great, right?
Why do I feel like there's a butt coming, Sigmund?
Well, that's because there is. There's a pretty compelling narrative and plot here, and this show is a true testament to Apple's willingness for experimental filmmaking on many different aspects. The 1969 setting, the absurdist direction, there's a mix in tones, and there's a constant shifting from one tone to the next, and from one scene to the next. And this is the type of show that you've never quite seen before, because I'm not sure it knows what it wants to be. I'm not one to put creative output into boxes easily, and that's why, again, I applaud what's being done here. There's beautiful things going on. A great performance from David Oyelowo. The comedic aspects kind of fall flat a lot for me. Of course, comedy is very, very different for every person. And otherwise, the show is a little disjointed. At times, it's got a quirky Wes Anderson-esque comedy vibe to it, and at others is really going for that surrealist vibe. There's some interesting sweeping shots in the first couple of episodes. The art direction and costuming is impeccable, and the other performances are pleasing, if not less calibrated to the story than one would hope for. But again, that could be a stylistic choice that fits the 1960s era in which it's set and the TV of that day. But yeah, it's a bit of a mismatch, and I think it's so different. It's in some ways kind of difficult to make out.
I agree with you. It definitely stands on its own in terms of genre. It's hard to nail this down. There are elements of it that, again, felt very intense to me. And then there are moments where it kind of feels like you're watching a live-action cartoon.
Sure.
There's a scene where there's like a really funny fight scene in the cafeteria of the prison, and I just thought, wow, this feels like I'm watching like a classic like Looney Tunes cartoon right now. And then, of course, it takes an intense twist. But it's just an interesting mismatch of different elements. And you talked about the comedy of it and how some of it didn't really quite land with you. To me, I get a vibe of something that I haven't seen in a very long time with some of the comedy. And it's a movie that very polarizing. So you're either going to really love this idea or hate it. But to me, it kind of has vibes of Napoleon Dynamite.
Okay.
A little bit, where the humor, a lot of it comes from something happens that's unfortunate. And then the camera just stays there for like a second longer than it really should. And so you just have to live with whatever just happened for so long that it becomes funny.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe for you it doesn't. But for me, there's a scene with his son where he's trying to pole vault and it just goes awry. And the camera just stays on him as he's laying there after this failed attempt. And to me, that was very funny. And I kind of got that vibe of just, it's situational in a sense, but it's like forcing that discomfort a little bit further than you're used to. And that's what makes it kind of funny. So that's another element that's mixed in with all this other stuff that's going on. And it really is a wide-ranging series, I would say. So you have to go in with an open mind and just kind of see if it connects with you. I think that's really all you can do. It's hard to know going in how you're going to react to it. I personally enjoyed the first episode quite a bit. That's all the time I've had to spend with it so far. But it definitely is very different from anything else I've seen before. And one question I did come away from the first episode thinking is, who is this really for? What's the intended audience? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think initially everyone. I think there is something everyone can enjoy an element of, and who knows, maybe this gains cult status long after its debut. There's a particular episode in this series that is a standout for me. Episode 5 out next week. It's called Father Facts, Figures and Failures, and it's part of a two-parter. It's stunning. Just visually, the cinematography is just beautiful, although, filming in California, a bit of a cheat code, really. And I was thinking about that. I was just like, oh my God, this is really stunning. And every frame felt like it could be framed. And I would almost call it Emmy-worthy in pretty much every aspect. It's a father-son kind of reconnection. And it really felt quite personable, quite connected, and in some ways quite tragic. There are surreal set pieces in this show that are surprising. There's one right at the beginning in the prison as it's being flooded, which I was like, oh wow, okay. Everyone's swimming now, and there's some really, really cool things that happen in this that I think could be enjoyed in isolation, but could also be enjoyed as part of this storytelling. And I think it's risky storytelling. And that's one of the things that I'm always going to kind of champion, even if the whole thing didn't really work for me. It's nice to see risky television being made. Something set in the 60s, something covering all of these different elements. You've got the US prison system, you've got religion and divine intervention, you've got family reintegration, invention, capitalism. So there's a lot going on here. And because of the name Government Cheese, which, if I remember correctly, is actually almost plastic that was given by the government that no one wanted to eat in the US. and I think that was during the Reagan years. But what's interesting about this is it kind of reminds me a little bit of a cheese board of sorts, right? You've got your favorite cheese that gets devoured way too quickly. Then you have that cheese that lingers on your tongue longer than you'd like. And then you have the smelly cheese that you stay well away from. In a way, to me, Government Cheese is a bit of both. Inventive and also a little crackers. Its first 4 episodes premiere globally today on Apple TV Plus, and each episode thereafter, and there's 10 episodes in all, will come out weekly. So yeah, definitely different, and I think again we've got to champion that and celebrate it, but I'm interested to see what other people think of it. I don't want to kind of force my views too hard on it because I want people to give it a go.
Yeah, I think it'll be fun to see the reactions once everyone gets their sampling of Government Cheese on Apple TV Plus starting today. From the invention of a self-sharpening drill to a new button from Google that will soon become mandatory for all Google TV devices, the button is big and blue and the width of the remote itself. It's named Free TV, and it acts as a shortcut to Google's ad-supported TV offering Free Play. And while the idea of free linear offerings are good and offer more revenue, I have to say this is a bit of a mixed bag for me. Sigmund, do you agree?
Yeah, I totally get it. And the one thing I kind of worried about when I saw that button, and I didn't know that it was related to Google themselves, was, oh, please, Europe, don't go and get any ideas and ruin our beloved Siri remote with this kind of thing. I got to say, I'm not a massive fan of this. I've got a reason why, and my main reason being that it's coming from Google, and Google kind of go through this phase of changing their mind every 5 seconds what they want to do, and something sticks for 6 months to a year. Although, to be fair, their TV offerings and YouTube TV has stuck it out, and YouTube, part of Google, is doing well. But I do worry that, if Google change their direction, that a lot of these remotes where this button is going to be mandatory soon become e-waste. I've never really liked the idea of buttons that become shortcuts to particular services. I think it cheapens things a little bit. I saw a Roku remote not that long ago with a Max button. Completely different branding for just a couple of years ago. And of course, Apple did the same. They had their buttons for a little while on some remotes, but I don't think they were widely spread. And I just like to keep things as simple as possible. But I do like the idea of this free streaming, and linear streaming is something that we've talked about, hoping and wishing for years now that it will come to Apple TV. So there's definitely something here.
I feel similarly to you. It makes me appreciate my Siri remote looking at this picture of what the Google TV remote is going to look like. I'm not a fan of the permanent service buttons either. I'm all for configurable buttons. If you want to make shortcuts, I mean, I think that's great. But one company paying another company to put their logo on the remote just doesn't feel quite right to me, because what if I buy that particular device but I don't pay for that service? Then that button is just wasted on me forever. That's kind of how I feel about this service too. I'm not a big free linear TV watcher. And so if I had this device, I think that button would just be wasted on me. I do like the idea of the live EPG and integrating with other live services. I think having a dedicated button for that would be great, but restricting it to one service from the vendor and making other manufacturers include that, it just feels like a bit of an ad play to me. Just kind of boost that service a little bit, and that doesn't sit right with me.
Don't forget, the Salt remote. I'm going to call it the Salt remote because it's the first company that really distributed it. But there's a remote by Universal Electronics. I forget the particular name, but it's a great alternative remote that we've talked about a number of times on this podcast for the Apple TV with backlit buttons and that kind of thing. But it has an additional button, and that is a guide button, which is perfect for those that are using Apple TV boxes with their cable subscriptions or, their IPTV services that are coming from providers like EE in the UK, Comcast in the US, and so on and so forth. And so maybe there's a place on a new Apple TV remote for a guide button like that. But what we don't want is an Apple TV Plus button because that's everywhere. Oh, dear.
I completely agree with you. I could even see a future where that TV icon button that can be configured between the home screen and the TV app, where that could become a guide button optionally as well. You kind of make that the home base that you want. I think that would be really cool. And, would be a software update, wouldn't require an update to the hardware. But again, coming away from this, really, I'm just thankful for my Siri remote, and I think I'll be sticking with it.
Talking of software updates, something that completely fell under my radar, tvOS 18.4 brought back the option to choose the time per slide in the memory slideshow Apple Photo screensavers, allowing for 2 second, 3 second, 5 second, 10 second, and 12 second increments. Originally, it was actually introduced in tvOS 18, but you can now find the option now that it's rejoined tvOS by going to Settings, Screensavers, Memories and Slideshows, Style, Classic, and then time per slide. So very, very cool for those, Devon included, that use their personal photos in their slideshows. I, however, stick with Snoopy, which I haven't mentioned this in the weeks and months since its general release, but they continue to update the animations there as well. Some incredible ones at the start of baseball season. So if you've not checked it out, on baseball game day, I think you may be surprised to see what's been added, and I just love it.
That's very cool to see. I love the Peanuts integration with Apple and, the Apple Watch and the Apple TV. I think that whole thing is so cool, and the way they're continuing to invest in it. Another series that could be the inspiration for some screensavers, maybe some aerial screensavers, or if they ever decide to bring back the Apple Originals concept in the screensaver section, if they decide to go through with that, is a series that we got a new trailer for this week, and that is Long Way Home. The newest entry in Ewan McGregor and Charlie Boorman's epic motorcycle adventure series follows the two as they ride refurbished vintage motorbikes from Ewan's home in Scotland to Charlie's in England. But rather than take the shortest route, they go the long way. It's an adventure that will take them to 17 countries over 9 weeks, through spectacular scenery and along some of the greatest driving roads in the world.
My name is Ewan McGregor, and for the last 20 years, my best friend Charlie Boorman and I travelled to some of the farthest corners of the world. This time, Europe is our playground.
I'm
we're doing the journey on vintage, temperamental 50-year-old bikes.
My bike's making funny noise.
It's the international thing. If it doesn't fit, hammer it.
These unique experiences will stay with you forever.
This, of course, stars and is executive produced by Ewan McGregor and Charlie Boorman, executive produced and directed by David Alexarian and Russ Malkin. The fourth entry in the Long Way series, following Long Way Round, Long Way Down, and 2020's Long Way Up, which were all acquisitions. Devon, what did you think about this? I'll be honest, this isn't my favourite series to watch.
I mean, that's fair. It's not for everybody. Personally, I don't usually get into the travel series super often, but I find this take on it to be really compelling because it relies so much on the relationship between Ewan and Charlie, and something I find really uplifting. I just love the concept that every 5 years or so, these guys can just get together, jump on their bikes, and go somewhere. And it can be an entertaining experience for people who like to watch them. So, yeah, it's not for everybody, but I think it's cool that they're continuing to do this, finding success in it, and continuing to build their bond and expand themselves as people, and we get to watch that play out. It's cool to kind of take a different approach each season. They're going vintage this year, so it'll be cool to see what bikes they pick, and they have to kind of clean them up and fix them up. And so that's another added element as well. But of course, I think the most interesting aspect of these kinds of shows is the locations that they go to. And we got a preview in the trailer of different places they're going to go. So I wanted to ask you, is there any particular destination that you're looking forward to seeing them go to?
I think we talked about it and touched upon it last week when we talked about the renewal before the trailer had dropped. And, you know, there was a little bit in the synopsis about how the journey is going to kind of retread and visit the native home of Charlie Boorman's mum. So I think the very beginning of this trip is going to be fascinating. I love that element in this story for this season. So yeah, I'm going to go with that, I think.
Yeah, I like it. It's different because a lot of these places are probably places that they've been before or are more familiar with because it's kind of their home turf. So that'll be interesting. But there's also a mention in the trailer of them going through the Arctic Circle.
Okay.
And there's not a lot of clips of it. There's just one clip. But I'm interested to see, you know, there's an element of the show that's also like, you know, just the trip itself and kind of the things you face along the way. And I feel like weathering the elements in the Arctic Circle could make for some interesting TV. So I'm interested to see how that goes. But regardless of what destination you're looking forward to, they're going all kinds of places. And the 10-episode journey premieres Friday, May 9th on Apple TV+.
Also coming not far behind Ewan McGregor and Charlie Boorman is Murderbot, set in a high-tech future with a rogue security robot secretly gaining free will. To stay hidden, though, it reluctantly joins a new mission protecting scientists on a dangerous planet, even though it just wants to binge soap operas, and we got our first look with its debut trailer this week.
I was built to protect and obey humans, but now that I've hacked my programming, I can do whatever I want, as long as they don't find out.
Do you think we can trust it?
Stay calm. Make contact.
It seems like it's going through something.
Stop staring at me.
I wasn't. Stop staring at me.
This is written and directed and produced by Chris and Paul White, based on the novel by Martha Wells, and starring and executive produced by Alexandra Skarsgård, and an ensemble cast including Noma Dumezweni, David Dastmalchian, Sabrina Wu, Aukshi Khanna, and Tatawana Jones, alongside Tamara Podemsky. I gotta say, this was not what I imagined. I have read the books. The adaptation wasn't at all what my imagination had conjured up when reading and listening to those books, but all the same, I'm very, very excited for this take because it's going to feel like I'm experiencing the story all over again. Even though we've known that Alexandra Skarsgård plays Murderbot, which is a name in all of itself, and one that made me laugh based on the reactions. You know, don't keep saying it. You know, Murderbot is terrifying. I always imagine Murderbot as a female robot. So this is really interesting, but I loved even the hints of the internal monologue that we got. I know I talked a lot about that when it comes to Your Friends and Neighbours last week, but I think this is going to have a similar feel for me when this does release. But I laughed a lot during this trailer.
I did as well, and I'm not familiar with the book series personally, but just based on the premise and what we've heard about it, I did not think that this trailer was going to have me literally belly laughing multiple times. And when a trailer does that, you know that you're in for a good time. So yeah, I'm excited about this one. I think this is a really interesting take on the premise and an interesting way to go. And I'm excited to see what they have in store for us. I was also just really impressed by the cast. Of course, we've heard the cast list, but seeing the trailer, there's a lot of people that we haven't heard about being involved as well, including Anna Konkle, who I think is officially a new Apple Original staple. I believe this is Anna's third Apple Original within just the past couple of years. So it's cool to see a familiar face and a lot of funny faces and people from the world of sci-fi who have a lot of cachet and history with it as well. So very impressive cast. And yeah, this trailer just got me very excited for it.
Yeah, one person amongst those that kind of gave their plaudits over the trailer, Silo's Hugh Howey. And he is really looking forward to this, as are many. And I think it's interesting, again, you know, we talk about from a adaptation of a well-respected and loved novel, it's always a difficult balance. And, you know, based on Hugh Howey's reception to this, I think they've gone the way at least he imagines it. Murderbot premieres globally Friday, May 16th on Apple TV Plus with its first 2 of 10 episodes. Both trailers can be viewed now on YouTube or the TV app. Alongside, I thought this was quite interesting, the first episode of Your Friends and Neighbours, which dropped last week on both platforms. So, of course, the Apple TV app via Apple TV Plus, but also YouTube. And that wasn't all. They were very, very busy on YouTube this past week, were the Apple TV team, because we got an Apple TV Plus summer teaser, came right out of the blue, and in it, some incredibly exciting news.
Yes, I got really excited when you sent me the link for this because, you know, it has some series and films that we're expecting. The Studio, Echo Valley, Murderbot's in there, Chief of War. But then there's some things that we didn't know were coming this summer, and we still don't have dates for, but now we know they're coming within the next few months. And that includes the new season of The Morning Show, Slow Horses, and Platonic. So some returning series that we've been looking forward to for quite some time. Now we know they're going to be summer releases on Apple TV Plus. We've talked about how stacked the release schedule has been this year, and this just shows how much they have in the can ready to go. And I just can't wait for dates for these so that we can start to put together when we're going to be seeing these as well.
Yeah, I mean, I keep checking to see if there are any dates, but as soon as those dates do become available, we'll let you know. This also kind of coincided with a new limited deal now available for new and pre-existing subscribers who can get 3 months of Apple TV Plus for just $2.99 a month using the link that we've left in the show notes. And this special promotion's available through April 24th.
In other news, according to Matt Bellany at Puck, Apple has hired former Max and Hulu executive Jonathan Melber as the head of global licensing for Apple TV Plus after working with Melber as a consultant for over a year. Thus far, the service's licensing efforts have been primarily focused on library requirements in certain territories. The company says there's no current change in its overall strategy, but bringing in someone full-time to keep an eye on things, to bring things in and focus on bringing things in that territory, I think is a good sign, and I'm happy to see continued push into the international fare for Apple Originals.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of Europe, I think things are pretty much laid down and pretty concrete. But I would be really interested to see how far they could go in the Asias and, you know, if we can see some more series and original series from African nations as well. I think that would be very, very cool, because that's something we don't really see. Everyone's kind of jumped aboard the Asian and South Korean offerings, like the soap dramas and that kind of thing. So it'll be interesting to see how Apple expands over time as well. Now, one show that we won't be seeing more of is Mythic Quest, which Apple's decided not to renew after its recently wrapped 4th season. Instead, the show's creators, Megan Gantz, David Hornsby, and Rob McElhaney, have put together an updated version of the season 4 finale that will air as the series finale later this week, giving the show a chance to say goodbye instead of game over. This was quite surprising news that I woke up to on Saturday morning.
Yeah, I was going to bed Friday night, and this broke really late on Friday, and I saw this headline that said that Mythic Quest has been canceled and that there's going to be an updated finale, and I was just in shock. We talked about the 4th season of Mythic Quest recently. We talked about the show's future. I didn't really think it was on the bubble, to be honest. We talked about there could be some financing things going on behind the scenes that might get in the way, but this has just been such a staple on Apple TV Plus for so long, and the way the 4th season ended, it felt like the creators were confident that the show had a future, and but maybe there was a little bit of hesitation behind the scenes that we didn't know about.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of foreshadowing that was happening with the show's producers. Did they have an inkling that the show may not be renewed? And was there something from a creative standpoint that was being stifled? You know, we talked about Mythic Quest and this 4th season and how, you know, well, we discussed its shortcomings in a lot of ways, as much as the things that we enjoyed. And so it wasn't a massive surprise to me, to be quite honest with you. That said, what I do love about how they've gone about it is they're paying respect to their audience by allowing and thinking ahead in producing an alternate ending and a closure to the show. I love the fact that the fandom was taken into account and thought highly enough to warrant alternative plans. But on the other hand, I do wonder if knowing the show wouldn't carry on did potentially stifle the creativity. I did notice with Mythic Quest, which gave us some incredible highlights. I think the end of season 1 and the pandemic episode, which really was a shining light during what was quite a dark time for us all. That's something that I'm going to remember alongside the standalone. But that first couple of seasons I thought were really, really special, and they focused on gaming culture. There were a lot of in-jokes there, and that I felt after the second season started to disappear a little bit as we explored more the personalities, or, well, Iron and Poppy, really, let's be fair, in the show.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I do feel like we lost some of those elements throughout the show's run, and I think about the Everlight special. That was also kind of a one-off in a sense. It was added on to the end of season 1 between seasons 1 and 2, and just some of the creative risks they took with things like that and how over the top some of it was, but also how it integrated the community of the company and really made us feel like we were hanging out at a studio. The show really did have some special moments that I'll continue to appreciate, and of course it also produced Side Quest, a series that we enjoyed quite a bit as well. So there's a lot to love about Mythic Quest. There's a lot to miss about Mythic Quest, and I'll be very interested to see what this alternate ending or what this updated finale is going to look like when we get to see it later this week.
Now, kind of looking forward, do you think alternative endings should become a standard practice in streaming as a sign of showing respect to the audience? Because this is something, personally, I'd love to see happen across the board.
It's an interesting idea, and part of me wonders if it's actually more common of a practice than we realize. I mean, we talk about films doing pickups and test screenings and alternate endings and figuring out, you know, how to best work out some of the story even after the fact. And I wonder if sometimes TV shows do that as well. I've heard of actors filming multiple different versions of scenes and not knowing till it airs which one they're going to go with, which is really interesting. But at the same time, to me, I wonder if it's a little bit of hedging and it gives you an out if you're trying to take a bold step with your story. It always gives you that option later. If you change your mind or get scared, you can swap it out in the edit at the last minute, right? And so to me, it's a little bit risky because at what point do you have the real story then? And could you change your mind 5-10 years down the road and say, no, this is actually how it ends now, you know?
I mean, George Lucas does it.
He does, and the fan base loves every time he gets his hands in there and starts messing with things. So it's interesting. Who does the story belong to? At what point does it really belong to the community? And all those kinds of questions. But I completely agree with you in terms of respecting the audience. I think giving them an ending in some form is the best way to respect them. And so personally, what I would like to see, if possible, and this is something we've talked about on the show before, I would prefer if every season finale, barring like multi-season orders, was written as if it were going to be the series finale. It's okay to leave some story arcs dangling to pick up in the future, but cliffhangers that are really going to disappoint the audience if they're never revisited, I feel like that can sometimes be overdone and can really become a problem when a series future isn't nailed down. The perfect example of this to me, weirdly, is a show that we didn't necessarily fully endorse and adore, but a show that I said did a really good job of wrapping things up, and that was Before on Apple TV Plus with Billy Crystal as a child psychiatrist. It did a really good job of telling a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and there's always a potential to go back if it had done really good numbers and they wanted to do a second season, they could have, but it was a complete story in and of itself. And I wish that more series would embrace that approach rather than the cliffhanger thing. Now, at the same time, when you do that, you don't get Severance Season 1 with people talking for years and years about what that line means and what's going to happen next. So I understand the impulse. I just feel like not every series is going to live on forever, and you have to keep that in mind when you're writing your finales.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I want to go back to what you were saying in terms of when does it stop becoming your story when you have to make all of these different choices, and when does it go from being a TV series or a film to a choose your own adventure, press a button here if you want to do this with the character, which is fun in its own right. And actually I'm surprised Apple haven't got into the interactive storytelling element of that kind of thing, like Netflix did with Black Mirror, I think a couple of seasons ago.
Yeah.
So that's something that maybe they could look at in that regard. It's really interesting to me to see the list of Apple original shows that ended sooner than we'd hoped. We've got Truth Be Told, 3 seasons, Home Before Dark, 2 seasons, Little Voice, The Mosquito Coast, Swagger, Shantaram, Dear Edward, Hello Tomorrow, City on Fire, The Changeling, Constellation, which was one that really irked me, Schmigadoon, Mr. Corman, The After Party, The Big Door Prize, High Desert, Still Up, The Completely Made Up Adventures of Dick Turpin, although for different reasons, Sunny, The Time Bandits, Central Park, and Dr. Brain, again for different reasons due to the passing of its lead star. And I think we also have to throw in a pandemic. We also have to throw in pickets and strikes into the equation for this relatively, I think, short list. I would say out of all of them, maybe half of which I'm a little bit upset by, but the others I could still enjoy as a story from the catalogue as they are. But I was wondering, in terms of alternate endings that just don't exist for Apple originals, What did you hope for? And is there a particular Apple original where if you could have written the ending, you would have?
I think looking at this list, there are some that hurt me more than others, certainly, and some that, as you say, we can just appreciate them for what they are. You know, a show like Schmigadoon, I would have loved to see it carry on, but it is complete in and of itself in terms of the storytelling and what you get. It's still worth watching. But then there's shows that just threw in cliffhangers at the end. I'm like, if you had just cut the edit 30 seconds earlier, like it would have been a complete series and I'd be happy. So I almost wish I just hadn't seen that final scene. I'm thinking of like Dear Edward, where it was such a great first season and then there was just the cliffhanger at the end. It's like, okay, I guess we'll hang on to that and speculate on what's going to happen. But for me, the show I think that hurt the most when it was canceled was actually Central Park.
Okay.
Which was the animated musical comedy series from the creators of Bob Burgers. It went for 3 seasons, and so we got a lot of it. And so I appreciate it for what it is. I still listen to the music sometimes because there's some great songs, and you know that's another element of the series that just lives on, which I appreciate. But the series went on for 3 seasons, and it's this battle between this rich landowner and the guy who runs Central Park, and the constant battle for the park's future. And we never got to see the ending of that. And that's what bothers me the most, is that we just never got to see that storyline resolved. So I'm going to make a pitch for a 4th season of Central Park, or if they just want to do like a TV movie, that'd be great too. I wouldn't mind just a quick wrap up to finish up the story and give us a few more songs from the soundtrack. So here's my pitch for the end of Central Park. So Bitsy, the antagonist, finally manages to buy Central Park. She achieves the goal that she's been trying to get for so long, but then she's immediately arrested for decades of tax evasion and labor law violations because, as we know, she's just a terrible person, and she's had some things in her past that are going to come back to haunt her. Her assistant Helen takes over the company and places the park in Owen's care permanently to protect Central Park from any future threats, and Owen's son Cole is reunited with his best friend Champagne the dog, and together they run a new dog park within Central Park. That's my ending for Central Park, and I'd love to see it. At least in my head, that's how it ends anyway, so I'm just going to stick with it.
I genuinely think they should do a feature film, and even if they have to kind of tell the story from scratch and choose the best songs so that we can have an ending, I just think Central Park on the big screen is a completely missed opportunity. And yeah, I hope we see it. I love it. My pick is a little bit different. It's a show that I've jokingly mentioned pretty much every time we talk about non-renewal, and it is because I genuinely loved it. It was from J.J. Abrams and Sarah Bareilles, based loosely on Sarah Bareilles' Come Up, and this is just a beautiful show. It's called Little Voice. Came out, I believe, in like 2021, and therefore the second season didn't happen, I believe, due to, pandemic and just the uncertainty around. But it was a beautiful show about a young musician and her finding the confidence within her to share her gift to the world. She cares for her brother who's autistic. She's worried about her father. And we end the show with Bess, played by Brittany O'Grady, who is also in The White Lotus, finally pushing past her fear of performing her own material. And in the process, she catches the eye of an A&R rep. And that element is amazing. It's a scene that somewhat mirrors Bareilles' own experience. But Bess's father and his absence is a major plot point. He is really the musical side of her. And he's got difficulties with addiction. And that soon turns into him losing his home, and then he just kind of becomes estranged from his family and his musician family as well, and it's really, really sad. And it's one of the elements that was always left dangling, and to me it actually had quite a big effect on me, because maybe this is one of the times where not having it wrapped up and allowing it allowing those thoughts and that lingering to filter into the real world has its biggest effect at times. So sometimes something that isn't renewed can actually work in its favour. And I often think about the father and where he is and how he ended up. And I live in London. There's a big homeless community, unfortunately. So there's lots of people where this is reality for them. But yeah, just a beautiful, beautiful story that I wish continued, but it didn't. And I highly recommend people revisit it because it is such a blast and such a well-told story.
It really is. I'm glad that you picked this one because it has become a bit of a recurring joke on the show, but it comes from a real place of wishing we could have lived more time in that world, heard more of that music, and really, found out, what happened to her father. And so, again, it's another one we're just going to have to fill in our heads, and that's just the unfortunate side of being a fan of things. But the nice thing is, at least we can speculate and share these stories and talk about what we would have liked to have happened. So those are our pitches for ending Apple originals that were gone too soon. But of course, there's shows beyond Apple TV Plus that we all loved and have wanted to see end in some way and see them wrapped up. And some that are classic that everyone talks about and everyone wishes for. You got your Fireflies and things like that. But we thought we might take a moment just to give our pitches for one series that stuck with us that we wish we could have seen the ending of. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. Mine's Freaks and Geeks, which I don't know if people know about this that much, but it's got an incredible cast. Some people you will know, like James Franco and Jason Segel and Seth Rogen. And what is pretty amazing about this show is that the finale was actually shot knowing that the show had already been cancelled after one season. And they shot it halfway through the season. I think it was like 3 episodes before the end they shot it. They kind of figured out that the show was being cancelled because craft services were dwindling and nothing had officially come down. But basically, this is a real show about freaks and geeks from Judd Apatow. And really, the cancellation came about because the head of NBC had left and a business guy took over who didn't really like what they were doing with the show. I just wanted more of this so badly. So did Judd. One of the dumbest cancellations in memory, still worthy. Bill Pope was the cinematographer on this. The majority of it was written by Paul Feig, and then he directed the final episode, which is very, very cool. And, Apple execs, find a way of talking to Judd and pitching, we want something close to Freaks and Geeks. Again, it's very melancholy. I believe one of the reasons for the cancellation from this exec was that the characters just didn't win enough. and it was basically too real in that sense. But that's what I loved about it. It was so real, so beautiful. And again, some of the names that I just mentioned, seeing them super young, very, very cool. And of course, Seth Rogen, kind of Mr. Apple TV Plus right now with The Studio, and of course, Platonic Season 2 coming very, very soon.
Yeah, that's a great pick and one that I think will resonate with a lot of our audience. And it's one that a lot of people have missed and wish would come back. And, if The Pit can happen and be so close to kind of what happened with ER back in the day, maybe we can get some kind of Freaks and Geeks side revival on Apple TV Plus. I'm rooting for it, Sigmund. It's a great pitch. I went back and forth on mine for which show that I wanted to choose an ending for. Actually, both of the ones that I was coming down to were kind of remakes or sequels to series that I loved that got good endings, and then they came back and ended up not lasting very long. So I almost did How I Met Your Father, where, of course, we didn't find out who the father was. So that would have been a great ending, actually give the promise of the show. But the one I ended up choosing was Girl Meets World, which is a follow-up to Boy Meets World, my favorite series of all time. And, of course, this follows the characters as they're adults and really centers on the daughter of the central couple of Boy Meets World. Her name's Riley Matthews. She's grown up in New York City. This aired on Disney Channel, and so it was meant to be a family series with kind of a younger audience in mind. And so as the actors got older and the storylines got a little bit older. It became less of a Disney Channel kind of, property that was easy for them to sell. And so they nixed it after 3 seasons. And it made me really sad because Boy Meets World was a series that I got to grow up with the characters. I felt like, I grew up watching Corey and went through many of the same experiences that he did. And I wish that for the next generation that they could have, that kind of experience with Riley and her friends. So I was sad I never got to see them finish growing up and kind of deal with some, high school and older scenarios. And what I really would have loved, my pitch for the ending of the series would be that it could kind of serve as an antithesis to Boy Meets World, where the whole thing of Boy Meets World is love conquers all, right? And it's all about finding your person and ending up with them in the end. I would have loved an ending for Riley where maybe she chose her education or career and, ended up finding fulfillment in that over, pursuing a romantic relationship as her primary goal. So I don't know, something like that. I really wanted the show to move to what was then ABC Families, now Freeform. I feel like it would have thrived there with an older audience, but it was a Disney Channel series and lasted as long as Disney Channel series do. So that's mine. If any Boy Meets World fans are out there and watched Girl Meets World and wish it had lasted longer, I'd love to hear from you. But that's the one that sticks with me.
Very, very cool. Just very quickly, one name I missed from Freaks and Geeks, Jason Segel.
Oh, yeah.
So, lots and lots of links to Apple TV+. Back to Apple Originals, though, and Apple Original Films are set to debut at the Cannes Film Festival in May. One is a bit of a surprise, and the other I was expecting, but is coming in a different way. Bono's Stories of Surrender will make its world premiere at Cannes, and I'm really, really excited for everyone that gets to experience this. It's part of the special screening series. I believe it's the 2D presentation. Of course, this is coming to us both in a 2D and immersive experience, and I'm still so confused and excited to see how they make both work and how they differentiate from one another. Very, very cool. But also, we got the news that Highest to Lowest, Spike Lee's upcoming film, is coming to the festival and making its worldwide debut, with rumours, of course, suggesting that New York Film Festival will see the public premiere in the fall during film festival season. Now, the interesting thing about Highest to Lowest is the world premiere actually will take place May 19th, which marks the anniversary of the presentation of Do the Right Thing at Cannes in 1989. It also turns out that May 19th is also the 100th birthday of Malcolm X, who Spike Lee honoured with his 1992 film, also starring Denzel Washington. So lots of links that, you couldn't really write, could you? Highest to Lowest is described as a reinterpretation of Akira Kurosawa's 1963 crime procedural class parable morality play, High and Low. Very, very much looking forward to it. I have recently rewatched High and Low. It is incredible. It's available through Criterion. I highly, highly recommend people check it out. In the meantime, though, some other films that are non-Apple originals that will be making their way to Cannes that I think people should be keeping an eye on throughout the summer and into film festival season and award season next year. They are The Phoenician Scheme from Wes Anderson, You're Him from Harris Dickinson, Eleanor the Great by Scarlett Johansson, which I'm very, very much looking forward to, V Pro V by Rebecca Zlotowski, The Mastermind by Kelly Reichardt, and Eddington by Ari Aster, the director of Beau is Afraid. And the trailer just dropped the day that we're recording this, and it's going to be out in theatres in July. Devon, are you excited?
I'm so excited. Beau is Afraid was my favorite film, and so grateful that you gave that to me for Christmas a couple years ago. No, honestly, it is a great film, and Ari Aster is an incredible filmmaker, so I'm excited to see this one coming to Cannes, and I'll have to get in and see this one as well. Unironically, my favorite section of the news every week is, of course, casting. This week we got one bit of casting news. which notes that Shea Wiggum of Fargo fame, Raymond Lee from Quantum Leap, and Sasha Calle from The Flash have come aboard the cast of Sugar Season 2, joining series lead and executive producer Colin Farrell in Mark Protasevich's unique take on the private detective genre. No plot details for Season 2 of Sugar, but I'm really excited to see that one come back, and excited about these additions to the cast as well. Let's get into this week's Apple TV releases. There's a lot coming out, starting with Apple Originals today, the premiere of Government Cheese with its first 4 episodes, and a new episode of The Studio entitled The War.
It's so good. Oh my God, it's so good.
Awesome. Well, you know, we talked about the missing film reel last week. You shared your thoughts on it. I really enjoyed that episode, and I think the series is just continuing to go from strength to strength. So looking forward to finding out what they have in store for us with The War. Then on Friday, we've got the updated Mythic Quest finale, see what's happening there, how they decide to end the series, as well as the premiere of Jane Season 3, a new episode of Your Friends and Neighbors, the penultimate episode of Dope Thief, and Friday Night Baseball, doubleheader at 7 p.m. Eastern with the Minnesota Twins taking on the Atlanta Braves and the Seattle Mariners at Toronto Blue Jays. On Saturday, we've got MLS Game Day on MLS Season Pass. Sunday Night Soccer seems to be taking a week off this week. We'll be back next weekend. Then on Monday, we've got a new episode of Apple Original Podcast, Big Time, which is a really interesting true crime podcast that I'm really enjoying. We talked about Apple TV's output on YouTube this week earlier in the episode. Lots to catch up on there. But there's one other extra that we wanted to shout out, and that is ice diver Ant Williams talking Apple Immersive Video on the podcast Voices of VR. So he was invited on to talk about the process of finding out about the project from Apple, at what point he found out it was going to be immersive and actually for Apple Vision Pro, and then the process of getting back in, and of course breaking his record on the Apple Immersive Video. So it's a cool chat, lots of behind the scene details of what it's like to work with Apple on this kind of thing, and well worth a listen.
I didn't realize he'd come out of retirement for this as well. It was like, oh, no, I'm done. They were like, well, we want to shoot this, and it's going to be for Apple. What? Oh, okay. In which case, let's go for it. And I'm glad he did, because what a ride that was. Now, of course, last week saw all of our Apple originals alongside the finale of Surface Season 2. I know that this show has flown under a lot of people's radars, so if you have yet to start Surface, and if not, then why haven't you? But we don't want to spoil anything for you, so please skip to the next chapter and rejoin us when you're ready. But right now, we're about to recap Season 2 of Surface, which is set in a whole new world, with this new chapter following Sophie to London to unravel the secrets of her past. Desperate to uncover the truth about her mother's death, Sophie must infiltrate the city's most powerful and secretive family.
Do you know what it feels like to not remember anything?
My mother died when I was very young.
How did she die?
She was murdered. I have to go back to where it all started. With you. With your family.
What do you remember about your mother?
I think the Huntleys were involved with her death.
You can't fight my family. You'll never win.
I need to find out the truth.
Now, this comes from Hello Sunshine, created, written and showrun by Veronica West, starring and executive produced by Gugu Mbatha-Raw, alongside Oliver Jackson Cohen, Millie Brady, and new this season, Phil Dunster, Gavin Dreyer, Rupert Graves, Tara Fitzgerald, Nina Sassonia, Jolie Richardson, and Fredo Pinto. But before we get into our thoughts on the season, a quick recap. Sophie, of course, returns to the UK in an attempt to understand where she came from and find the woman from her memories, who turns out to be none other than Eliza Huntley, a member of the most affluent family in the country. Sophie discovers that before her accident, she was working with a journalist to expose the Huntley's role in the death of her mother, and as she digs deeper, she finds out an even more unsettling truth. She herself is the firstborn of Henry Huntley, Eliza's father, whose family hid her existence years ago by sending her to an orphanage under the false name Tess Caldwell. Now, with the help of her husband James, Sophie tries to expose the truth, but only ends up accused herself when the Huntleys try to pin the death of one of their security team on her, and we end with Sophie turning herself in to the police in an attempt to set things right, only to learn that there are multiple warrants out for her arrest for crimes she does not remember. This season, Devon, was wildly different from the show's first, which centered on Sophie's life in San Francisco as she recovered from a traumatic brain injury. Did you think the show's jump across the pond, in more ways than one, was successful, and could you have predicted it?
No, I absolutely could not have predicted it. And I have to say, it was definitely jarring at first, just such a different setting and tone and almost just approach to the whole thing. This season played out more like a mystery, I think, than the first season did. But I think as things progressed, it started to make sense. So I found it best just to go with it rather than questioning it too much, because it was fun to see how it all played out. But yeah, that jump from season 1 to season 2, it felt like a totally different show in terms of, I mean, there's a whole new cast. There's just totally different backdrops and settings. Of course, we're following Sophie, and there's similarities in terms of her struggles and what she's dealing with. But yeah, it was definitely a big jump. And I guess maybe in a small sense, that's kind of us getting to experience what Sophie's feeling as well, because it's a big change for her. But I don't know I've ever seen a series from season 1 to season 2 change so much while, not being like an anthology format or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised. I'll be honest, I think we talked during season 1 how I kind of struggled with it a little bit because it was quite confusing. It was quite disorientating. This felt a lot more grounded, but every twist was another big moment as opposed to a confusion, right? This was really a big surprise for me, the second season. I think the biggest connecting thread between the two seasons was Sophie's amnesia, which continued to cause trouble for her in the UK. Did you find this continued plot device effective this time round? Because, as I say, that first season was a disorientating filter that at times I don't think made sense and made it hard to follow.
Mm-hmm.
This, I feel like they got it spot on.
I think so too, and I don't know if it's because we're just used to it as a part of the premise of the show now, a year on, but to me, I actually found it refreshing and interesting to spend so much time with a character who knows as little about what's going on as you do. You're used to watching TV series where you're trying to figure out the secrets of the people and try to figure out what's going on in their heads. Here, it's very literally like Sophie and you have the same amount of knowledge about what's happening to her. And so you really can see things from her perspective a little bit better. And it just makes that mystery element of it, I think, that much more satisfying because you're working it out with her as she goes. I will say the fact that her memory loss was a secret this season, whereas in the first season, everyone knew what was going on. I felt like that element of it was an interesting twist on it as well. I felt like there were moments throughout the season, especially with Eliza, where if Sophie had just told her what happened to her, things would have been much easier, because instead of saying, I don't remember that, she basically looks like a terrible person for not recognizing certain elements of relationships, not putting things together. And I understand that she's in an unsafe environment, doesn't know who she can trust, but it just felt like a little bit of honesty about that and recognition of the things she was dealing with could have helped her along the way. There was a moment in the finale where she suffers another head injury, and I thought, okay, this is the moment. We're going to get back to Sophie's memories and put it all together, because, that's so typical of amnesia storylines, right? You hit your head again, you get all your memories back. There was a little bit of that, but it wasn't like that instant reset that I was expecting where she just suddenly remembered everything. She's starting to get some things back. Maybe we'll see that continue as things go on, but it's going to be slow, which I actually appreciated that they didn't just go straight to that as like an out.
Yeah, not one of those kind of, over the surface reset buttons, but those ones where you have to get a pin or something and,
Exactly.
and shove it in. Do you find the show was easy enough to follow between, the setting shift and Sophie's memory loss in that regard?
I feel like even after seeing the entire season, there are still details I'm not totally clear on because the timeline gets really messy, right? You've got multiple trips back to the UK. You've got her multiple names, which I spent the entire season thinking her real name was Tess and that Sophie was something she adopted in the US, but it actually was the opposite, right? Sophie was her name all along, and she had been forced to take on this name Tess from a girl who passed away at an orphanage. It was very, very convoluted, but they eventually got around to it and explained it all. I think I got it overall, but in the middle, it did get a little muddy to the point that I was like, what's really going on here? I think the multiple trips, still trying to understand what she was doing with James in San Francisco, like what that decision was. And we haven't filled in those gaps because, again, she doesn't remember. So she's piecing together some of the things that happened to her back home, but that whole part of her life, I think, is still a mystery. So I'm actually feeling like I need to rewatch this season to kind of pick back up on some of those details, get that timeline straight, because like any mystery, it makes more sense in the rear view, but there's still elements of it that even though I feel like I got the big strokes, I still feel like there are parts of Sophie's story I'm not totally clear on. Did you get that vibe as well?
Yeah, I feel like 2025 is the year of the rewatch, right? It'll be interesting to see how, when looking at season 1, how much of it marries up and how well this has been put together compared to like a Severance, which I think, is kind of top of the totem pole in that regard. But yeah, I'm interested again to check out both season 1 and season 2 again. With season 2 though, we got a lot of fresh faces, and there are new members of the cast whose performances stuck out. Of course, Phil Dunster, who we have to mention because we've seen so little of him beyond Ted Lasso. At least I speak for myself when I say that. But were there any other faces that really stuck out to you this time round? And was it the devious elements or was it the helpful elements that really helped kind of, flesh out this story?
I think you need a balance of both. You've got the deviousness of Rupert Graves' character and just the terrible things that he's doing working behind the scenes. And I think you get that side of the Huntley family, but then you also get someone like Grace, who's getting ready to marry into the family. She's played by Frida Pinto, and I thought that she did a really good job of portraying someone from a different vantage point of Sophie, who's learning more about the family and trying to decide if she wants to become a part of it and how far she's willing to go to make those compromises to kind of get in and be with the person that she loves. So I thought that was an interesting theme to add in, along with, Sophie's journey of identity and memory and who you are. But then I think the performance that stuck out to me most this season was Millie Brady as Eliza, who she was in season 1, but very briefly, flashbacks. We didn't really get to know her at all. And as we spend time with her throughout this season, we realize she's quite damaged and has been through a lot of trauma, not only in her life, but also this season. And so we get someone who's going through a different series of struggles than Sophie, but kind of on a parallel path of just trying to work things out and overcome some of the things that's happened to her. I feel like she had to thread a very complicated needle in her relationship with Sophie, and that's a very difficult task to take on, but she did a great job. And I'd be very interested to see how that relationship goes from the revelations at the end of season 2 that, they're half siblings and, Eliza's family has done all these horrible things. She's not complicit in what the Huntleys have been up to. So the question becomes where her loyalties lie. And I just think that's a really interesting element of it as well.
I mean, you say that. I've just got to the point now where I just trust absolutely no one and absolutely nothing. And that's where I think this show really kind of excels, right? It's number 6 in the Apple TV Plus charts at the moment, which means whilst it is flying under the radar of many, there are many people watching this as well, which I'm really, really happy about, because I think with a show like this, kind of going back to what we've been talking about this episode, there is a fear that we don't get a tying up of the story and that we're just left in mystery. And so I wanted to talk about the future of the show. You know, season ends on quite the cliffhanger, to the point where a family member said to me when I said, "Oh yeah, that was the finale." What? You know, how long have I got to wait for new episodes? Like, there was genuine distraught when I said, "Yeah, that was the season finale." So with Sophie learning that she is wanted for her misdeeds, she can no longer recall. You think that there's a strong enough premise for a third season? And if it comes about, would you expect as big a shift in the next season as this one? Like, or are we going to stay in London? Or could you see another season where we shift to somewhere completely different again?
I mean, depending on where she went after leaving the UK originally, I guess she could be extradited. Maybe that could be a way to change the setting.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I don't know exactly where they're headed. Again, I really want them to fill in that gap between her discovering what happened with her mother and then her ending up in San Francisco with James. And I think kind of exploring her criminal history could be an opportunity to do that. But I think we're certainly not done with the Huntley side of the story as well. So I think we're going to be spending more time in the UK on the Huntley estate where we know bodies are buried, or at least one is. So even if we venture off a bit, I think we're going to end up back. I think all roads are going to lead back to the UK for Sophie. And so, I think it'll be interesting to see what she did. Hopefully it's just not a bunch of embezzlement cases that she just happened to go globetrotting, stealing money from different people. But, you know, I could see that. But it'd be interesting to see what that history is. And again, I think there'd be an opportunity to fill in some gaps in her story. I certainly wouldn't mind spending more time in this world. And as we discussed earlier in the show, getting an opportunity for a cleaner ending, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see if the show gets picked back up.
I mean, I would imagine there was a third season that had been signed for, because a lot of the time these shows that get beyond their first season have a 3-season deal, and therefore I'm quite confident that we will get to see this story wrapped up, and I'm really, really excited for it. I think the series has really come a long way from the first season. It is complex storytelling, and I say complex in the sense that I don't feel like it's been dumbed down for an audience, and yet this is something that I think does appeal to the mainstream at the same time. There's a healthy balance there, and I think, you know, we have to applaud everyone involved. And again, I think it's just great to see Gugu in this lead role. I loved her in the morning show. If you remember her from the first season, and you remember just the dramatic output that she put out there, if you have yet to see Surface, you're doing yourself a complete disservice. So I say, for those that have yet to check it out, check out both seasons of Surface, now streaming on Apple TV Plus now. And for those that already have, you've got another good reason to rewatch and try and piece all of the pieces of the puzzle together before a season 3 and see if you were right. We'd be interested in your theories, and you can share them to both of us via either socials or via email to magic@macstories.net.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to see what's in store and what our listeners are thinking about Surface. But for now, Sigmund, let's go back to this week and talk about this week's TV app highlights. What have you got for us?
Well, of course, we mentioned last week the new Captain America film and the Looney Tunes animated film that were coming this week. They're available from Tuesday evening in the States. Well worth checking out, both of them, although Looney Tunes will be my first pick out of the two. That said, something that came out last week, which I had no idea of, and then was recommended it, and I checked it out, absolutely adored, Magazine Dreams. This is on PVOD. It's Elijah Bynum's film about a black amateur bodybuilder struggling to find human connection in an exploration of celebrity and violence. I highly, highly recommend checking it out. It's not going to be for everyone, but I think there's some great takeaways from this. Highly recommended. Again, if you're looking for something a little bit different, this week, Grand Tour makes its debut on Mubi. It's a film directed by Miguel Gomez, set in 1917 Burma, about a British diplomat who is set to marry his fiancée, but after a sudden panic, escapes Singapore, sending her on what evolves into a chase across Asia. Very, very much looking forward to this after seeing the trailer this week. And coming to PVOD this week is Ash, about a woman who wakes up on a distant planet and finds the crew of her space station viciously killed. Her investigation into what happened sets in motion a terrifying chain of events, and it stars Isa Gonzalez, Aaron Paul, Iko Uwe, Kate Elliott, Beulah Cole, and Flying Lotus, the musician turned actor. So really looking forward to that. Of course, for the wrestling fans out there, this weekend is the show of shows. WrestleMania happens every year. This time, it's across a whole weekend. So you've got 2 days of WrestleMania, plus the Hall of Fame, plus the NXT special event, which I believe starts at 9 a.m. local time in Vegas. But the main event itself features CM Punk, Cody Rhodes, The Rock, and of course, the star of the upcoming Apple original film Matchbox, also star of Argyle, John Cena, making his return and looking to get his record-breaking 17th World Championship before he leaves the company with it. So, very exciting stuff, at least for me. Personally, super excited. Yearly tradition ever since WrestleMania 9, which coincidentally hailed from Vegas, where this year's event is taking place. And, well, it's WrestleMania weekend for me. But here's a pick that is non-wrestling. This is our up next picks now. The Rehearsal sees its return with a second season on Max this week. Nathan Fielder has, I think, an acquired comedic style, but it's one that I really, really get drawn to. And in The Rehearsal, he gives people a chance to rehearse for their own lives in a world where nothing ever works out as expected. And this is very funny, darkly comedic. It plays on the borders between reality and fiction, and also acts as a profound introspective on life's challenges, including, the very mundane moments of life as well. And I get a good chuckle from this. I enjoyed the first season. I enjoy everything Nathan Fielder's really done, including The Curse, which was on Showtime a couple of years ago. Time really does fly by. So, yeah. That is my pick for this week, The Rehearsal Season 2. And I think our up next picks this week are Season 2 renewals. What have you got for us?
Yeah, mine is another returning series, this time on Disney+. And it's Star Wars Andor, which premieres Tuesday on Disney+. It's created by Tony Gilroy. It stars Diego Luna as a young Cassian Andor. Shows the backstory of how he became a leader in the Rebel Alliance leading up to Rogue One. And what people love about this, even people who aren't necessarily the biggest Star Wars fans, is this is Star Wars minus the lightsabers. So there's not Jedi in here. This is about spy work and setting up to overthrow the Empire and that kind of thing. So it's very captivating. It shows a lot of elements of the world that people have been curious about for a long time and haven't necessarily understood as this whole thing is coming together and gearing up for what we see in, of course, the original Star Wars trilogy. There are some stellar performances last season from Genevieve O'Reilly, who plays Mon Mothma, Stellan Skarsgård, who plays Luther Rael, and Kyle Soller as Cyril Karn, who is a government worker within the Empire. Again, a really interesting perspective into the world of Star Wars. No lightsaber battles, just lots of paperwork and people arguing over the future of the galaxy. This season, it's 12 episodes released in weekly batches of 3, and each covers a year in Andor's life, counting up to Rogue One. I really enjoyed Season 1. I'm excited for Season 2. It's a cool rollout that Disney's doing, and it all kicks off next Tuesday.
I'm actually quite excited for this. I think I said that last time when you were like, Andor season 1. I was like, yeah, I'm going to check this out, because out of all of the newer films that came once Disney, took control of Star Wars, Rogue One was my favourite film, and probably the one that I would actually revisit. The rest of them, I didn't feel the same way. This is a good reminder. Andor Season 1 and Season 2 now available on Disney+. And, well, that brings to an end this week's Magic Rays of Light.
Thanks so much to everyone for listening. We appreciate you coming back every week. And, of course, we want to hear from you. You can contact us on social media via the links in the show notes, or you can email the show or send us an iMessage to magic@macstories.net.
We'll be back next week to recap Berlin ER and the week in Apple TV. So until then, stay safe, watch some Apple TV, play some Apple Arcade, and have a great week.